Welcome back to Federal Insights, Cybersecurity, refresh your approach to detection and response, sponsored by Cloudera here on Federal News Network. My guest today is Carolyn Dubey. She's Principal Solutions Engineer and Cybersecurity Lead at Cloudera, and I'm Tom Temin. And before the break, we were talking about some strategies for securing both the data itself and the privacy information that might be contained therein. Any final thoughts on making sure that your data lake, your data pond, if it's local, and the metadata that's so crucial to all of this stays secure from the very hackers you're using it to try to protect against?
Sure. Just to wrap that up, we want to make sure that we have good security, good governance. We understand where our data came from, where it is going. That's the lineage. So, and being able to simplify that security and governance. So, making it much easier to administer and less error prone. The other thing is to have the security and governance work across multiple phases of the development lifecycle and the ingestion lifecycle. So if we have great security and governance, but it only works for one part of the process, and then we have to do something else in a different process, that doesn't really simplify what we're doing. So what we want to be able to do is create a security and governance layer that works across multiple parts of the workflow, as well as across when the data travels. For example, when we push it up to the cloud, we want to make sure that all of those security and governance policies travel with it. So simplifying, reducing errors, making sure that we have good lineage, we understand, and then making sure that those policies travel with the data so that we're not losing that information.
And earlier you said something that we hear also a lot from many, many federal practitioners, and that is that we've got so many tools to deal with cybersecurity that the number of tools, the range of tools itself becomes kind of a challenge. And each of those tools does produce data. That's the purpose of them, of one sort or another. Tell us more about ways to get all of that data so that it's interoperable, that there's some sort of normalization that happens to it, I think is the word you used, such that all of the data can be used holistically in your cybersecurity response and your research.
This is a key part of the log ingestion. So when the logs come in, they come in a plethora of formats. Larger organizations, they have literally thousands of formats. And even in the same kind of tool class like endpoints or firewalls or IPSs, there are in each organization many different installations and many different versions of those tools. So this is a critical problem. The first key is to identify a schema, a common schema, and to be able to make a transformation and pull out the relevant bits from each of those formats and then put it into the right part of the schema. So what we end up with in the end is a continuous and consistent schema, so that when I want to go find something, I mean, the whole point of this is so that I can find something, right? So when I want to go find what happened to all of the events, what happened to this endpoint, I want to be able to go in and consistently say, okay, find me all the events for this source IP, and then have it be a consistent field and a consistent format. So it's a string. So basically, we have to take all of the information, all the logs that are coming in. We have to normalize them into a schema using an ontology, which is really the data model underneath. And this is, it's a very critical part of the system.
Yeah, so it sounds like then that you are basically stripping away the formatting and getting to the essential data. And I would imagine besides helping your own agency to analyze your data, that technique would really help in data sharing so that perhaps, in some nirvana, there's a government-wide view of all of the data that could talk about a long context. That would be about as long as it gets.
Absolutely. So if you want to be able to take this data and you want to be able to put it together with other data, You can't just take something in one schema and then attach it to another schema because, you've got a user field. How do you know what the user field is in the other schema? So it's really important to be able to normalize to that consistent format, especially when you're taking in data. And there are different things that you can do. So, for example, if you have data that's coming in from another agency, you can then have like an ETL process or another normalization process to then put it into that common schema. But that's really the secret sauce to stitching all of the formats together.
Because that's where you really get the power, is when you can see and compare incidents and occurrences from agency to agency. Then you can get a really big picture and a complete picture, almost like a mosaic, of what it is that is happening from the threat environment.
Absolutely. And we find throughout industry, from enterprise as well as the agencies, we're looking at different aspects of the same data. So for example, if you start to look at fraud detection or criminal investigations, you look at cyber defenses, there's a lot of commonality between the data that you would look at and the information that you need to extract. So if you're extracting that data and then normalizing it and putting it into a consistent format, your agencies can really work together with a common purpose, instead of, one agency looks at the data one way and one agency looks at the data another way. It really helps to unify into that single view.
And we've been talking about data in the use of understanding cyber attacks and cyber occurrences, but very often network configurations, privileges, the way devices are set, and devices themselves are worth, 5 hours of talking about because of the proliferation of devices and mobile devices that have been happening. Uh, can this type of platform also enhance understanding of making sure that everything is buttoned up correctly in your own environment with respect to, say, privilege granting and the zero trust idea and the configurations of both network devices and end user devices?
That's really a great question, Tom, and it's something that we've been working on here with different organizations and agencies that we're working with. How can we see a lot in the attacks that are happening. There are problems with configuration. Something is missing. A user has access to something that they shouldn't. They're configured improperly. So there are these kinds of attacks that are taking advantage of misconfigurations. And how can we take the log events that we're getting now, and how can we apply some analytics to it to figure out, is there something through a hunting process, is there something that's misconfigured here? Do we see a user who has access, who's showing up in an audit log, and maybe they shouldn't have access to this, whatever it is they're accessing? So, can we see, or can we look at, analyze the users that have access to certain tools, and we have this other user which has access to something else, which is not within the norm for their role. So once we start to take in those audit logs and we start to then enrich them with information about the users, with information about their department, about their role, then we can start to make some intelligent decisions about looking for things that shouldn't be there.
And let's back upstream a little bit here in the time we have left. And you hear the issue of data silos coming up, and many agencies begin at this problem from a point of having silos. What's a good initial strategy to break down your silos and start getting those data together, so that you can normalize it, take away the formatting, and all the other good things we talked about?
So typically, the best way to approach this is one step at a time. So a lot of things in cyber, it's one step at a time, and it can be quite a long-term project. But I would say prioritize that data that is most important to you. So which data is your organization, your agency going to get the most value out of, and then get started that way, and then create a prioritized list. And you don't have to boil the ocean. Maybe you don't go in and extract every single field from every single event that you possibly can, and kind of do a depth first search. Maybe you do like a breadth first approach, where you're bringing in the most valuable data, the most valuable information, and then building up your formats and your intelligence step by step. So I think that's the best way, is to prioritize it.
All right, I think we've covered it beginning to end. I want to thank today's guest, Carolyn Dubey, Principal Solutions Engineer and Cybersecurity Lead at Cloudera. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much, Tom. Great to be here.
And I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Cloudera.